everyone. Welcome back to Bring the Jury podcast. We've had a little bit of time off for vacations and Memorial Day. These guys just got back from the beach, hence the bronze glow.
The tan glow of justice.
The tan glow of justice. I love it. Yeah, so I'm here with Luke and Brian Sheely of the Sheely Law Firm here in Columbia, South Carolina, also located in Charleston, South Carolina. On this podcast, we cover a wide variety of different true crime cases here in America. Lately, we've talked about the Alec Murdaugh trial, Stephen Smith, which we're going to touch on today. We've also talked about the Idaho 4 and Brian Kohberger. We've even gone all the way down to talk about Alec Baldwin. And we're always taking new recommendations for cases that you guys are interested in and want more information about. You can always find us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, obviously TikTok, and YouTube. We always upload the full episode to our YouTube channel. That's the Sheely Law Firm YouTube channel, where you can go back and watch this full episode if you have to tune out at all or come in late. And we also upload the audio to pretty much all major streaming platforms. And this week's episode will even have a little extra treat, which I'm not going to tell you guys about. You're just going to have to figure it out when you listen to it on Spotify.
A treat.
A little treat. Hello, and hello, Carrie. Thanks for tuning in. So we'll go ahead and get started with Stephen Smith. What's going on today?
Yeah,
today's news.
We haven't talked about Stephen Smith in a while. We, kind of got to a culminating point when they got permission to exhume his body. Kind of the recap essentially was that this was allowed to Stephen to have his body exhumed. It was forensically and even archaeologically examined. They hired an outside pathology unit out of Florida that was highly regarded, and everything was done appropriately. And so a lot of new forensic testing, and so that's kind of where the case has rested until very recently. The most recent information is that the grand jury has been impaneled, which basically means they've got grand jurors, people from the community that have been normal everyday folks that have been summoned to hear testimony and evidence in a grand jury investigation. And so they've been impaneled, and so that's been going on for about 2 weeks now. And we were talking about this, Hannah, before the episode here. You don't just kind of willy-nilly start impaneling a grand jury unless law enforcement, and again, this is going to be SLED, South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, has their ducks in order and they're ready to bring witnesses forward, bring evidence, and let the grand jury hear information. And so, Luke, what do you think that means in terms of warrants or search warrants or anything else coming out of this proceeding?
Well, it's any and all the above, and it's not like some defense lawyer there or there's somebody for the other side. It's 18 folks. 12 of them have to agree there was probable cause, and the SLED through their attorneys and the Attorney General's office are providing that evidence to establish it. But it means probable cause of somebody for a crime. So before this case was dead in the water, it was kind of this hit and run, this tragedy. But due to the whole Murdaugh situation, Miss Stephen Smith's mom really, due to the national attention, international attention, got publicity, got help, got a GoFundMe, got everybody's attention.
It was even covered on a Netflix documentary, which was totally covering the Murdaugh situation, which to this point is not connected.
Mandy Matney's
everything was
podcast as well had a lot with Stephen Smith.
And only because poor Buster Murdaugh's name was constantly thrown in this in the rumor mill did it get that traction, that sense of, well, let's do something about these Murdaughs. So everybody threw a bunch of money at it. Law enforcement through SLED wanted to seem like they were giving it attention, but very quickly as they gave it attention, they were also, you had statements from Miss Smith's attorney, Mr. Bland, saying, well, this was never really about the Murdaughs, things like that. So it got the funding, it got the attention, but those indictments will probably be against some of the folks that were initially in the circle of suspicion that were obvious leads. That would not be Buster.
That would be Patrick Wilson and Sean Connolly.
Yeah, let's recap really quick just the timeline with when everything was happening live time, what happened, and maybe what went wrong to get these guys out of the circle of suspicion.
Nothing was done. What?
Well, the whole, you guys, all you viewers out there know this, but poor Mr. Stephen Smith was found dead in the middle of the road with his loosely tied shoes on. His car was a little ways away as if he'd been walking, and there was essentially local law enforcement in a corner thought that he had a hole in his head consistent with a gunshot wound. Well, USC pathologist Presnell quickly determined through her science and the fact that there was no projectile there, no exit wound, well, this is not a gunshot wound. This is some type of blunt force trauma consistent with being hit by a vehicle. And that you basically had this lead investigator at the time that stormed into her office and said, "Why do you think this?" And she's like, "Well, why don't you?" And so that kind of really got a furor about the situation, an uproar, where he was disgruntled, but they had some information, but they didn't have evidence of a murder through a traditional weapon like a bat or a shooting. It was just a lot of speculation by people who really weren't trained to make that, but they had some leads. We had the older boyfriend, Mr.
Found on Craigslist,
Burkhart, who had so many inconsistent statements where he was clearly concerned about being a suspect and just being wildly protesting too much his innocence. And then you had
pointing blame on random people in the Cayman Islands.
Right.
I don't
know. Ignoring law enforcement, but then calling, making excuses for his last communication, and then going to Florida and getting assault charges. So he was a juicy suspect, but really the juicier ones, they had credible leads about. Literally, a Patrick Wilson says, a Mr. Connolly told me he hit Stephen Smith with his car. Mm-hmm. That's about as credible as something you track down as you get. And per the report, the officer, I think, went to one school, and they said, "Oh, he doesn't go here anymore. He goes to this one now." He then goes to that school, and they say, "He's not here today."
Great day to be sick
for
this
is
guy.
It. That was the end of the inquiry. That is the circle of suspicion is erased, and this is because that plus the pathologist saying it was not a murder in the mental sense of it. It just died like a grape on the vine, just withered up because it had no attention. It had nothing. And then it was only with the Murdaugh situation that it really got the attention it needed, where
ironically,
naturally, law enforcement will look ridiculous if they didn't pick up on these leads. So Mr. Bland, on behalf of Mrs. Smith, said, I think on Court TV, that he really, as a representative of that family, are being told all this stuff that we started off this program with. Warrants could be coming. They're seeking indictments. It's just a question of who that is. And I would bet my entire law firm in practice that it's not going to be Buster. So,
and the names that were initially investigated, but just it went to a standstill. We're talking about Patrick Wilson and Sean Connolly. So, Wilson's kind of, saying, well, Connolly, hit Stephen. Wilson at around this time as well had an attempted murder charge that was dismissed by that circuit solicitor's office. So who knows exactly why that happened. I don't know if it was in connection to anything, what is not maybe reported so far. But there's so much insinuation, and let's think about back then in 2015 before for right or wrong, better or worse, Buster Murdaugh has always kind of been, his name has always been kind of rumored as connected to this. Mm-hmm. And, back then with the power and the influence that the Murdaughs had in that community, you even have Randy Murdaugh is basically saying, call law enforcement. Wilson's allegedly telling his stepfather that Connolly is the one who hit Stephen, and then Wilson's stepfather apparently is reporting this because Randy Murdoch told him. So even though there's no information connecting a Murdoch to this, Randy Murdoch is there. And so as powerful as they were at the time, if there was kind of rumor type information about Buster, and then Randy is saying call law enforcement, that could maybe put a chilling effect on law. Like, you go to a school and they're not there, okay, I guess my work here is done, because the Murdochs are on paper
just encouraging me to kind of check that box.
And I just don't know why follow-ups weren't done. You got someone essentially confessing that someone else has done something.
Yeah, that's probable cause all day long. And the wild thing that will occur if an indictment comes and if someone gets arrested, and maybe it's one of these original suspects, maybe it's not. Again, it's not going to be Buster. But this case will get national, maybe international attention. It will have all the bells and whistles and hoopla just simply because it was Murdoch adjacent.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm, Buster and one of these original obvious suspects gets indicted and arrested, I'm going to be pretty damn upset. And I'm going to be kind of wanting my apology because he just was drugged through the mud throughout this whole thing.
Yeah.
Just based on objectively what a bad person his dad might have been. And because his name was dropped and he was, generally the right age.
Yeah. The media just ran with it.
They just went nuts.
And we can't just forget law enforcement, the one complete 180 they did on this case. So before the Alec Murdoch trial, and again, apples and oranges, right? But before the trial, this Stephen Smith investigation was essentially closed as a hit and run, but with no malicious intent. Just a unsolved hit and run, which, by the way, is a crime. And then after the Murdoch successful prosecution, and all of law enforcement who prosecuted that case, along with SLED, were kind of doing their victory lap down in Walterboro. And I remember this. Mark Keel, who's a relatively private spokesperson for SLED. He's not always up and out there in front of the media on specific cases. He said, by the way, anyone associated with the Stephen Smith investigation, we're coming for you. If you had something to do with it, we're coming for you. And they reversed. They basically said, this investigation's wide open. We're now looking at it again. And he basically...
We think it's a murder.
They were strutting and they were...
I think that was such a flex to push back on how criticized they were as a law enforcement agency throughout that trial.
So in the aftermath, the next day aftermath, or maybe even... It was after the sentencing. So after the jury came back on the guilty verdict, we had to wait a day for the sentencing. Judge Newman did the sentencing, and then there was that sunny afternoon. Everyone was wearing sunglasses, and they were all giddily talking about the case and the sentence and everything else. And that was when Mark Keel said, by the way, we're coming for anyone associated with this case. We're diving back into it. And then shortly after that, they reversed their position on it. This is now a homicide investigation. We're changing our minds. We were wrong. That doesn't happen. And many podcast episodes ago, we were saying that doesn't happen. That does a lot, because whoever does get charged on this, whether it's Connolly or Wilson, is going to say, you guys
wrote it off.
You guys, you always said this was closed for this reason. Now you changed your tune. And again, it's because of Netflix. It's because of the national, international coverage of this.
Yeah. I mean, think about poor Miss Smith, who back in 2016 wrote this letter to the FBI. I'm sure that got thrown right in the shredder, from mailbox to shredder, because she didn't have any attention. But now, because they were so tied in to the Murdoch network, she could snap her fingers and get on CNN or anything, and be like, I want to know what's happening. SLED investigated my boy's death in the first place and nothing happened. And then that network turns to SLED and goes, do you have a comment? So of course they have to look accountable, look professional, look responsible, and reopen this thing and arrest somebody just based for total credibility, because it was maligned, and now Mrs. Smith has that media power that she can wield just because they're Murdaugh adjacent.
So back then in 2015, they had probable cause to arrest, and they didn't do anything. And then the case got closed by SLED, who screwed around with it. And now they've got cell phone records that they unlocked Stephen's phone and tablet.
Oh, they did.
Well, I'll say this. SLED back then didn't necessarily screw around with it, but once the pathologist said, this is a hit and run, this is not a murder in the traditional sense, they gave it back to the same investigator, local law enforcement, and they screwed around with it and didn't follow up any leads.
Right. So
SLED got out of it.
Right. So they had probable cause back then to make an arrest, and they didn't do it. But now what they're going to have post Murdaugh, and now new evidence, they're going to have Stephen Smith's phone, which they've already said they've got, and they've unlocked it. They're going to have this new, fresh autopsy and forensic pathology done. That's going to be potentially revealing more physical evidence. They got Dr. Kinsley.
King Kinsey?
Yeah, I'm sure his billable rate has gone up a little bit more than the Murdaugh trial, but he's going to be putting fresh eyes on it.
I mean, he's part of the new team based on the GoFundMe. He's got theories. He's got fresh eyes. You know, he's again, Murdaugh expert witness. Here we are on a case that is merely Murdaugh adjacent, but he'll have some theories to help work. But I'm sure SLED will do their own independent analysis. But because all that money was raised, Dr. Kinsey can get paid to look at this. So it's quite interesting, and it does make me kind of feel for all the normal folks out there who, right or wrong, their cases were never solved, whether it was with any true malice or just a standard hit and run. And because they weren't Murdaugh adjacent, they didn't have that. Adjacent. They did not have that power to discover.
Well, for any and all unsolved murders in this country, just say a Murdaugh did it, and then call your local reporter.
Right, and they'll eat it up.
And you'll drive an investigation.
If we've learned anything.
And then you'll get your case solved, hopefully.
Because a squeaky wheel gets greased.
I was at a baseball game, and the Murdaughs were there one time, and I swear that this is connected to Stephen Smith's murder, out of all the word works. So, do we know if the autopsy has formally come back yet? Do we have those results? Or will we just find that out when...
If they're back, and I imagine they are back, it's top secret. It's top lockdown. There's not going to be any, public dissemination of it. It's going to be hit you over the head with it when SLED is ready for it.
Now, I will give you this little tidbit I hadn't thought about till now. So Brian and I like to vacation at Edisto, which was widely publicized as where the Murdaughs had their Edisto house and where Maggie liked to spend a lot of time.
Did y'all take a field trip when you
And
went
so
down there?
We were a stone's throw away from
our house. We researched was literally 250 yards from their house, so we did ride our little bikes over there just for curiosity purposes.
Nice setup.
So
It is a nice setup.
Yeah.
I think that's where, I know that Buster has, allegedly nothing to do with this, but isn't that where he's currently kind of hiding out and staying?
I don't know. I thought I heard that, and we didn't know if it was sold.
I thought he was living with his girlfriend on Hilton Head.
Oh, okay. A different beach house.
Well, Edisto is a great place. So if I had to pick, I would stay
You're
there.
good at it.
Anyway,
Anyways.
we digress.
So we don't know about any kind of new pathology information, but the way the grand jury process goes, they're investigating, they're taking testimony. If you recall, in the Alec Murdaugh trial, I can't remember exactly who, but it was some witness was on the stand and said something that was somewhat inconsistent with their grand jury testimony. And there was,
I remember.
which one was it?
I think it was Odom. It was one of the lead investigators that essentially lied
Oh yeah.
and got busted in 2 different lies that he knew at the time were directly not truths. And that was one of the best moments for the defense in the trial, from my perspective, is that Jim Griffin was able to impeach him with that and get him to admit that.
And I recall a dramatic moment where sealed.
Well, I think he knew that the blood spatter analysis that they had sent off, that law enforcement got excited about, was not human blood at the time he went to the grand jury. It was something like that.
Yeah, it was.
But he still presented it.
He did, and I remember a moment where Griffin was able to rip open a grand jury transcript of testimony and kind of dramatically open it in court, and then
Right. Well, that's the beautiful thing about a statewide grand jury, unlike your regular county grand juries. And we're not talking about the federal system, but county, state grand juries in South Carolina are just vaults of secrecy, whereas a statewide grand jury has a transcript. And so that's why Jim Griffin was able to get that and use that, and transcripts are always helpful.
Love a transcript.
So all that is going on as we speak, and I'm sure it'll be with great fanfare whenever an indictment is announced. And I would suspect that Mr. Conley, unless there's just something wildly off base, might need to have representation.
Oh, he
He
should.
needs it.
He should already.
He
have
needs it anyway.
He should already have representation.
But maybe we'll be surprised and it'll be something completely out of left field. But it will not be poor Mr. Buster.
Quick question. With information that is so top secret to a case like this, for example, the autopsy results, would immediate family have access to those results once they were made available? Or is it like everyone's going to be kind of finding out together? Will Sweet Sandy Smith know the result?
That would have to be totally at the discretion of law enforcement right now. What's the levels of trust? I mean, they are in communication with Eric Bland, Sandy Smith's lawyer. He seems to be getting a good bit of information. They don't ever want to say anything so specific in the very beginning that could detract long term, and where people could start attacking the opinions. But maybe there could be some general kind of disclosures that the family can get updated on.
Well, she paid for it. It was a private autopsy.
Well, that is totally right.
It was a private autopsy.
That is true. It wasn't
law enforcement also attended with great interest, but this is not an official law enforcement. I don't think you're going to find anything wildly different than Dr. Presnell. I mean, maybe they piece together the bone fragments in a way that they can go, well, sure, it's consistent with a moving vehicle, but I think it's a certain type of side view mirror of a truck. Maybe they opine even further. And I think they were looking, you're not going to find, I don't think, any DNA that wasn't looked for in the first place. I recall there being some blue paint chips that were kind of halfway tracked down.
Yeah.
So it's really to make Mrs. Smith feel better. I'd be shocked if they had something that just a hair came out of that casket. They're like, aha! And they ran it through some database and it was suspect number one.
We've also had tons of experiences where state experts and defense experts mostly differ on major opinions. Here we're going to have a state head of MUSC pathology department, the initial pathologist, who, that's kind of what we're talking about. That is always going to be baked into this investigation. Her analysis of it as a hit and run. And then whatever...
But a hit and run can be a murder.
Yep, sure can.
You don't know the mental state of the person who's driving the car until you talk to them. And if they incriminate themselves, our people are out there.
Hopefully you'll hear that.
Blowing the leaves.
That's right. The new pathology outfit is Final Diagnosis. Diagnosis.
Right. So it might be that they get to a hypothetical suspect who they think was driving the car, and he just spills the beans under pressure, and they say, son, get on this polygraph. You need to tell the truth. It's going to be way better for you if you do classic techniques that they like to do. And he's like, yeah, I'm so scared. Therefore, it's just a hit and run. Or he says, yeah, I've hated this guy since I knew he was homosexual and he made a snarky comment and I got drunk, so I decided to purposely run him down. That's murder and hit and run. So they just need a suspect. So I would be wildly surprised if a new autopsy comes up with, like, you're not going to hear, oh, it's a gunshot wound. You're not going to hear, oh, he was beaten to death with a pool cue, and here's how we know why. You're not going to hear any of that. It's just going to be...
Well, we heard from the coroner at the time that it was definitely a gunshot wound. Remember that?
Right. The funeral home director he was a coroner, and he saw a hole in the head and said, man, that's a gunshot wound. And then
that got the
local
troopers
trooper got very agitated about that. But that was easily dismissed because there was no projectile, there was no exit wound, there was no stippling. It was a hole, but not a gunshot wound.
Something else that could possibly be useful, if ever found, is the missing rape kit.
Yes.
Well, I think that initially was reported as missing, but I think it has been.
It has been found.
Has it?
Yeah, there was some reporting after initially was said that it was not able to be found. They were like, yeah, we got it. We got it all together. But yeah, I mean,
they opened up one real quick and there is it.
So I think the secondary reporting is no, we have it. We're good.
But we don't know anything about that, I guess.
Well, that type of stuff would be totally in law enforcement's control, and they would keep that very close to the vest. Mm-hmm. Whether they can run it through any databases or compare it to any samples from any potential suspects. I mean, as part of the grand jury process, they could go, and get a search warrant for someone's DNA. Mr. Burkhart, come here, give me your DNA, and that might tell you something.
Your boy, Mr. Burkhart.
Yeah. And they can rule people.
Hannah, when he was first being mentioned, you wanted to get him.
Yeah, I was a little biased. I just all signs were pointing to Burkhart, in my opinion. And they may still be if he comes through in that orange jumpsuit.
I mean, he was an older man romantically involved with Stephen.
Found on Craigslist.
He fled the state.
Mm-hmm.
He got into a big brawl down in Florida.
Got charged.
Wildly inconsistent statements.
Yep.
And as we know,
totally bizarre statements.
As we know, when you're a romantic partner who makes wildly inconsistent statements, you are in the circle of the investigation until you get yourself out. So how did he get himself out?
I have no clue. That's the golden question. Maybe he wasn't at school that day.
Not at school.
So
a little too old for school.
Yeah, a little too old for school. He wasn't an adult ed. Okay, so switching gears quickly here. You all obviously are criminal defense attorneys here in South Carolina. How would you represent, let's say, are we talking Patrick Wilson or Sean Connolly? I always want to say, isn't there like a celebrity whose name is like that?
Sean Connery.
Oh, yeah.
The man, the myth, the legend.
Yeah, I always almost want to say Sean Connery.
Former Mr. Scotland bodybuilder, famous actor.
The best Bond.
The best Bond.
The best Bond.
The best Bond. Heard it here.
How would we represent something like that?
Yeah, what would be some of your key things that you would be really interested to learn more about? Like whether it be, obviously the initial questioning and how it just immediately died, or what are some things that you would find most
We wouldn't
valuable?
care about anything. We just simply blame Buster. And we just need one jar to buy. Blame Buster. Buster, if you're out there kidding, we never blame you. But
not you, neighbor.
But you have to figure out what is your best theory of defense. That's based on the evidence they have against you. Obviously, with the massive amount of time, the fact that he was ruled out, apparently by the lead investigator at that time, that they don't have any independent evidence. Do they have a car consistent with impact? Do they have any motive? Lord willing, you hope your client doesn't come to you having fully confessed.
Well, here's the difference between us and a lot of criminal defense lawyers, and even on the Murdaugh case, any kind of high-profile case, you lock it down. You shut the F up. You're not giving
Shut up and lawyer up.
You're not giving press conferences. You're not having your client give a telephone interview in the middle of rehab. If we were representing anybody that got associated with this case, they would be in a straitjacket and they'd be locked in a closet in our office, and we wouldn't let them see the light of day until we got all the evidence. And
we have a few people here now.
Right. Just locked up, right? On ice, ready for us to defend them, but they're not going out and getting in trouble. They're not talking to anybody. Their social media is not existing. Delete social. Everything's done. There's no outside world at all with our clients, our murder clients especially, that are, we're trying to protect them. And then what we do is we don't give press conferences. We're not giving a lot of interviews. We're not giving 2-3 interviews, but we wait for the evidence to come, and then we can look at it. And then, and only then, do we have a conversation with our client about what the evidence reveals, what are the best defenses, and go. And in this kind of case, there'll be a lot of people to point fingers at just because of how the case evolved.
Mm-hmm. I had a case in court today that was really a tough case, resolved by a very uniquely worked out plea. I never once had a conversation with my client about the allegation. The offer was presented. He wanted to take the deal. I didn't sit here and ask him to tell me this or that, but he locked it down. He did his job. He kept his head down. He stayed out of trouble. And we waited all this time, and it worked out quite well for him. When you don't make evidence against yourself, that's step number one.
Yeah, and that could have been a life-changing outcome for him. But because, if I recall, you shut it down,
and
then you arranged a turn-in from across the world.
Moved here from a different country and quietly went about our business of resolving this case.
Was there a language barrier?
No.
That would have just been interesting. I don't know. Nice little tidbit.
It always helps. So if an indictment comes for whoever they get an indictment for, assuming they do, they will approach that person and try to probably interrogate the snarkies out of them.
All 3 of these individuals that we mentioned on this episode need to be lawyered up right now. Mm-hmm. And their lawyers don't need to be giving statements, being video recorded in cars, talking to investigators with their lawyers present. They just need to shut up. Mm-hmm. Whoever it may be. But someone's getting charged.
Yeah.
But not Buster.
Not Buster. I just had a question and now it just totally vanished from my mind.
You're thinking about Switzerland.
I am thinking about Switzerland. I'm about to leave. I'm getting out of the country.
When is that again?
I leave on the 29th of Atlanta.
Sorry, I didn't mean to broadcast your vacation plans.
No, you're fine.
Sorry about that.
I'm going to Switzerland. If anyone has any recommendations, send them my way. We might go down to Italy as well. I'm not fleeing the country for any reason. I wouldn't have to. I would have great legal representation. Unless you guys are lawyers that do tell people to get out of the country sometimes.
No.
Makes it more difficult.
Yeah.
Unless you go to Argentina.
Okay, well, here, real quick. This wasn't the question I was going to answer, but I did just open up to, of course, a statement about Mark Bickard, where Smith was on the phone with him at the time, moments before he died, saying that he was out of gas and that he thought he was being followed before the call dropped. So maybe we'll talk briefly about what do we think the phones will reveal, or the iPad? What are some of the key?
I mean, it's going to be always the last people you're communicating with. They're going to be looking, extracting it, looking for any negative history with anybody, text, emails, social media accounts. They can do the geolocation. I mean, they can do everything. The phones are an incredible tool by law enforcement. So, I mean, the fact that the phones were not accessed back at the time of the killing is just kind of incredible. I mean, even back then, there was tons of it. I mean, we've been dealing with phone information in criminal defense cases for decades now in terms of, what prosecution can use and extrapolate from them. But, yeah, who is he talking to?
Yeah.
Bickard saying I was on the phone with him. Mm-hmm. right around the time, were you really?
Yeah, right.
Were you really? Or are you trying to
if
cover?
Steven's phone doesn't reflect that, that would be a real problem.
That's a problem.
Critical.
Because it's Mr. Bickhart's account of trying to say that he
Get himself
thought he was
out
being
of the-
like followed.
Yeah.
And like, oh, I hear trucks in the distance.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like helping to promote this rumor that's spreading that this is a murder. And obviously, as a romantic partner of somebody, you're going to be upset. But like, I'm just going through the report again, and it was like, first contact saves a relationship. Then second contact states he thinks foul play was involved. Third contact sat down. He wasn't sure about timelines. Just rambled in conversation. Then he's calling. Now he won't stop calling. Bickhart called.
Like
Bickhart
13
called. Left a
times or
voice
something
message.
crazy.
Bickhart called. Bickhart called. And then it goes on until finally he talks about
And this is him
What do you
calling
hear?
the law enforcement.
The investigator,
it's just so like I always love when independent evidence either rules in or rules out something. So that's what you're looking for if you're law enforcement. But if they got his phone records and there was like no call from Bickhart, I'd be going right back to Bickhart and being like, why are you lying to us?
Yeah.
Again, attempt to contact Bickhart, voicemail. Now he's stonewalling them. They can't get a hold of him.
That might have been when he was moving to Florida.
Right. He was packing. He was very busy.
Yeah, I mean, it's just very inconsistent. So
I mean, perhaps they were all three somehow involved, and Mark was just orchestrating the whole thing, keeping his tabs on his
God,
location.
you were a Mark hater. Hating on
Not really.
Mark.
No.
well, the phone will be a wealth of information.
Yeah, definitely. Let's just be distracted from the facts. Give us the facts. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that we still don't know yet. A lot to be revealed. Do we have any timeline for when all this stuff will start rolling out, or when we may see?
No, but these types of investigations, kind of once charges are brought, law enforcement has the advantage because they are ready. They've investigated. It was very much like the Murdaugh case, done the same way. State grand jury and Murdaugh's defense team were trying to push back. I mean, normally you really want more time to deal with the weeks or maybe months of grand jury testimony, go through it, all the evidence that's been produced from that. So really, I mean, just by the mechanism that if and very likely a charge is brought, once it gets served and bond set, or actually not set, bond would not be set, any defense lawyer is going to be back on their heels because law enforcement has been proactively moving their pieces across the board, and then you got to fight back pretty quickly. So this will be, law enforcement is always in a better position than like just a normal probable cause warrant from a local law enforcement that did like a shoddy job, and then it gets kicked to a local solicitor's office, and they're trying to pick up the pieces and figure out, well, wait a second, how am I prosecuting this case? This is entirely different. So law enforcement, once they get this thing going, will be very much in the driver's seat, and then it'll be defense lawyer will be reacting and trying to, do the best they can. And I'm sure there'll be scheduling conferences, and it'll be, whole big shebang again.
Do we know the location? I imagine it was probably difficult to get a jury.
Grand jury?
Yeah.
No, I mean, they just subpoena those folks in randomly.
But you don't think that they had any
Oh, in terms of finding someone who doesn't know anything about this?
Yeah.
I think that process, I don't know that there's a whole lot of voir dire in the grand jury process. I think you just get randomly hit.
And it's just...
Yeah.
And you presented evidence because it's just probable cause. It's not a final determination of guilt. So it's just an impaneled grand jury through the normal grand jury process. And
no defense there. It's just, do we move forward?
Yeah, they put up all that evidence, and if 12 out of those 18 think that there's probable cause for whatever crime they're trying to put forth and whatever person, based on the evidence that's presented, that's going to produce an indictment or it won't. But it's pretty rare that grand juries convene and don't produce an indictment, especially in South Carolina, unless they're trying not to, unless law enforcement is kind of trying to kill a case or purposely reduce a case, because it's not an adversarial process. It's a prosecutor with law enforcement presenting evidence that they believe shows a crime was committed. So once they have all their ducks in a row, they go forth and present that, and as long as the grand jury is like, well, sounds good to me.
Yeah, I'm ready to go to lunch.
They stamp that bad boy, and there you go.
And then it's going to be like, I'm calling Netflix.
Yeah, get my quote. Very cool. So I think we'll probably wrap up there today with Stephen Smith, but we do have something that just came in recently that you all may have heard about, depending on how deep in the true crime world you are, that we do want to talk about as this unfolds. Brian, I'll let you go ahead and just give us a little trailer.
So in Utah, there's this woman, last name Richens, who basically, her husband died, and then she basically became somewhat famous for writing a children's book about her husband's death that she wrote to help the grieving process of her children, and it was like a bestseller. And it was all sweet and innocent, and for kids that are dealing with a parental figure's death. And then lo and behold, she gets charged because it turns out he was heavily poisoned in a fentanyl overdose, like 25 times the normal dosage in his liquor drink, his Moscow Mule, that she served him up. And she just had her bond denied. And there's a lot of proceedings about that, and basically at the bond denial kind of hearing, law enforcement has a pretty strong, albeit circumstantial case that not only did she try to and successfully poisoned him, she got fentanyl from the housekeeper. They charged the housekeeper. She's spilling the beans and then alluding to all these other attempts to kill him. Her finances are a mess, and she was trying to recover life insurance and other financial benefits due to his death, but
the housekeeper will sell you out if there's anything we've learned in the last year.
So this is fairly recent. This is an article from today's date about how she was very upset in bond court and disagreeing with everything that law enforcement said. Her defense lawyers are saying it's circumstantial and that this housekeeper is a lying liar, and that the state has her threatened with all kinds of charges unless she basically cooperates. And the defense lawyers are saying basically, just because you're bad with money doesn't mean that you're going to kill someone, and that they reverse engineered a prosecution to fit the facts.
But at least from what I read,
that's right,
is a prime example of how law enforcement getting that phone and analyzing that phone early on can be very powerful for their case. Unlike the Stephen Smith case, here they did it right away, and her internet searches are very incriminating. It's things like,
how much fentanyl does it take to kill my husband?
Right, literally that. Or how do I delete my iPhone information permanently? Or like,
oh no,
how do I get paid on life insurance if the death certificate
and also
is still pending?
Even like luxury prisons for the rich.
I was like,
oh no.
So like, if you commit a crime or you're planning to commit a crime, for those of you crime committers out there, figure out a way to learn what you need to learn, but don't do it on your phone.
They're a library.
Go to a library. And if you're going to go, what is it, the Dewey Decibel System?
Yeah, they're the free library. Free access.
Just rummage through.
Just do it the old-fashioned way.
And if you need a phone, because you got to call people, get one of those old flip phones that you like. I met with a client the other day, and he was, let me call my people, and he whipped out this big old thing, and he was
Boost
like,
Mobile Cricket.
Basically, and I was like, oh, nice phone. The early 90s want their Motorola back, and he's like, man, it ain't gonna get me like that. And it was like, boop, it just had just the number pads. That was it. No internet, no searching, just
Or get it. Better than that,
He couldn't even text that thing. He was just dialing numbers.
get a pager. And then when you get that pager coded number like the wire, then go to a public payphone and speak in
But
code.
this guy was old school. He was like, Sheely, they ain't gonna get me like that.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, they won't. That's smart.
but she has all the trappings of a suburban housewife, soccer mom
Yikes.
who went off the rails.
Oh, man.
So that would be quite interesting.
And then just is raking in from this grief book. That is twisted.
Corey Richens. So we will be following her case with interest.
Her name's Corey? Corey Richens?
Corey
Or
with
that's the...
Corey with a K?
Corey with a K. Oh. Kouri Richens.
Corey.
I feel like crazy stuff happens in Utah. People kind of get wild out there.
Yeah.
I'm watching Under the Banner of Heaven with Andrew Garfield. He's like that LDS investigator.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah,
It's a good show.
it's freaking wild. Freaking wild. All right, guys. Well, we missed you. Thanks for tuning in after our their vacation. If you guys have any cases that you would like us to discuss, I know a lot of people kind of throughout today's chat mentioned Donald Trump and everything going on with him, which is, just huge. And maybe one day we'll discuss all of that. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah, but we definitely want to talk about Corey. Obviously, we still have Brian Koberger and the Idaho 4 still on our radar as well. So we're always open to taking new suggestions. And yeah, you can always follow us on social media, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, all of that good jazz. If you missed any of this episode and want to catch the full thing, you can find that on pretty much any streaming platform, pending Apple perhaps, but I think we may have found a solution to that. But catch us on Spotify if you want the full video to see these bronze legal justice guys. Then you can do that on YouTube. It'll be posted there. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to send us a DM on any of our socials as well. And if you're feeling so generous, you can always donate. The link to donate to this podcast you can find on our social medias as well. It's like the Buy Me a Coffee app that people use. So whether we use it for coffee or beer, you will never know. But anyways, it's been great. It's been real. It's been fun. We'll see you next week.
And it's been Bring the Jury.
Yes, that.